iFi is a company that likes to be a little different. Their products look and sound different from the rest of the pack. Whereas other manufacturers are shoehorning the newest DACs and most neutral or analytical tuning into their products, iFi likes to keep things a little more simple. iFi has a whole range of gear from portable to uber expensive, uber audiophile desktop setups. The only price category that iFi has not captured is the sub $100 range. Last year, iFi released their Zen DAC, an interesting hybrid amp DAC with balanced 4.4mm input and output, an IE match sort of thing, and bass boost. The Zen DAC is an excellent choice for those who want good build, clean, slightly warm sound, and balanced topography. The Zen DAC is a headphone and speaker amplifier in one, and it's quite a good bargain. Last month, Drop collaborated with the usual conductor of the hype machine to promote the iFi Zen Can Signature 6XX edition. Ugh, say that 5 times fast. You had 7 days to pay $250 for a product with no real reviews, no comparisons, and no paying user feedback. I cautioned people against jumping on that bandwagon, but clearly many people were easily persuaded by Drop's marketing team. Well, 2 weeks later, iFi released the Zen Can to everyone for $80 cheaper. And you can get the Zen Can now instead of having to wait until the end of the year for the Drop version. I bought the Zen Can at full price. Let's check out the Zen Can and find out if it's got anything worth considering. iFi says that the Zen Can is, quote, nitro for your headphones. Basically, it has a whole lot more power than the Zen DAC. In build and design, the Zen DAC and Zen Can are indistinguishable. It's the same housing, using the same materials with similar button and port layouts. iFi says that the Can has some features from the $1,700 Pro iCan. Namely, the Zen Can has the same Class A discrete balanced circuitry as the Pro iCan. Comparing the Can and DAC, that is the Zen Can and Zen DAC, you can notice 2 big differences on the front panel. The DAC has a bass boost feature, whereas the Can has the bass boost, 3D EQ, gain, and input selection buttons. The bass boost is just that, it bumps up bass just a little bit. As always with iFi products that have this function, the bass boost on the Can is tastefully done. It is a few decibels increase in the mid-bass and sub-bass. It does not bloat or distort the mids, assuming your headphones aren't already boomy to begin with. The 3D feature is what iFi calls, quote, special sound circuit that provides truly out-of-your-head experience in height, width, and depth. You can choose to activate only the bass boost or only the 3D EQ, or choose to activate both at once or turn them both off. The gain selector goes from 0 decibels, 6 decibels, 12 decibels, and 18 decibel adjustments. The volume knob is exactly the same as the one on the Zen DAC. It is mute at approximately 7 o'clock and at maximum volume all the way around, again at 5 o'clock. The input selector lets you choose input from RCA, single-ended 3.5mm, and balanced 4.4mm. Some might be a little dismayed that the Can does not have a traditional balanced XLR input. If you are that type of person, I want to emphasize that 4.4mm is a better design. It keeps the housing much smaller, the cables much lighter, and hopefully will be the wave of the future. There are indeed 4.4mm to 4.4mm cables around. You can order some from Amazon or Heart Audio Cable. You can also purchase 4.4mm to female XLR or 4.4mm to male XLR cables. I will leave links for all those types of cables in the description section below. The biggest and most obvious feature is the Can's power output. On balanced, the Can provides 1.15 watts at 32 ohms and 385 milliwatts at 600 ohms. On unbalanced, the Can provides 1.6 watts at 32 ohms and 98 milliwatts at 600 ohms. Why is the unbalanced far more powerful at 32 ohms than the balanced? I have no idea. Finally, iFi provides their 5-volt iPower. That is if you buy their Launch Edition. I have a link in the description section below for the Launch Edition on Amazon. So, if you bought the Drop version of the Zen Can a few weeks ago, you may want to know why you spent $80 more. Since you and I have not heard the Drop version, I cannot say if there is any audible difference. We can, however, compare the specs. Drop is pretty bad in providing meaningful specs for their products. Unfortunately, their version of the Zen Can is not spared from the lack of proper info. Blame iFi or Drop, it doesn't really matter. Drop was selling the amp and it was incumbent on them to make things sensible. Here's an example. The Drop can supposedly has 1 watt of power at single-ended for 16 ohms. This, of course, is significantly lower power output than the 1.6 watts you get at 32 ohms on the Zen Can, the non-Drop version. Drop does not provide power output numbers for 32 ohms. It is possible that the power output scales up from 16 ohms on the Drop version, but you won't really know. In fact, you will never, ever know unless somebody can get in touch with Drop or iFi to provide that specific information. Moving on, we can see that Drop claims their version has a maximum power output of 756 milliwatts on balanced with 300 ohm headphones, and at 600 ohm headphones, 385 milliwatts. iFi does not say what is the power output for the Zen Can at 300 ohms. Shame on you, iFi. Look at the front panel of each device. You can see that the same ports and buttons and the LED lights are exactly in the same places. The only difference is that the bass and 3D button on the iFi version has been replaced with the HD6XX and X Space button on the Drop version. What is X Space? Who knows? But I'm willing to bet that it's the exact same thing as the bass boost and the 3D EQ that the original Zen Can has. Just as with the Zen Can Launch Edition, the Drop version comes with the 5-volt iPower supply. So, based upon all this, can I draw any conclusions? Comparing specifications and using common sense, one could not be faulted for thinking that the $80 cheaper and currently available to buy and deliver within weeks iFi Zen Can is very likely the same thing as the hyped and expensive Drop version. Of course, I could be mistaken. To test the Zen Can, I connected it to the iFi Zen DAC using a 4.4mm to 4.4mm interconnect and to my Soundcause LA-QXD1 using a 4.4mm to XLR female cable. The Zen DAC has slightly warm sound signature with a gently U-shaped sound. The Soundcause is a neutral DAC that is easy on the ears. I played music using my FLAC library and Amazon Music HD. I used my HD6XX, Modhouse Argon, and 600 ohm DT880, which was modified by Matt. A link to his Etsy store is in the description below, and used balanced connection through Heart audio cable for the 880. I wanted to answer a few questions during this test. First, what is the sound signature of the can? This can be determined using the Soundcause. Second, does the can adopt the Zen DAC sound signature when those two are stacked? Third, what differences, if any, are obvious when the HD6XX is paired with the Zen DAC versus the Zen Can? Fourth, can the Zen Can drive difficult-to-drive headphones like the Argon? Finally, assuming you believe in the raw power hypothesis for the DT880, does the can provide enough power to drive the DT880 600 ohm variant? Well, without further ado, let's do. In order to determine the Zen Can's sound signature, I paired it with the Soundcause LA-QXD1. As a reference point, I also plugged the Soundcause into the Rupert Neve headphone amplifier, with which I am very familiar. The RNHP is a neutral amp. The RNHP has an organic sound signature, meaning it has a natural, uncolored sound with clear mids and unaccentuated treble. The bass is present but not bloated. There's no bass roll-off or bass boost. The RNHP simply is. To test the can's sound signature, I use the Soundcause via balanced connection. I also use my Allo Audio S4 headphones. These are very neutral headphones and perfect for such tests. I plug the S4 into the single-ended jack. At zero additional gain, the S4 was at very comfortable listening volume around 12 o'clock on the volume knob. Switching the gain to plus 6 decibels, the volume was well above safe listening levels. I switched back and forth between the Soundcause and the can stack and the Soundcause and RNHP stack. The Soundcause sends signal out the RCA and XLR at the same time. Consequently, it was merely a matter of pausing the music, turning down the volume, and connecting to the other amplifier. Of course, I volume matched as best as I could. It did not take long to determine that the Zen Can has a slight bass emphasis, and that is without the bass boost or 3D effect turned on. After repeated tests playing numerous tracks, it appears that the Zen Can has a slight emphasis in the mid-bass. Sub-bass rumble was about the same between the two amplifiers. Vocals seem to have the same amount of clarity and emphasis. Treble was also very similar between the two. It sometimes felt as if the RNHP had slightly more pronounced treble for bass or horn instruments, but that was probably a difference of a few decibels and could be attributed to imperfect volume matching. There was no audible noise or distortion whatsoever on either amplifier. After about an hour of listening back and forth, I think it is safe to conclude that the Zen Can is close to neutral with a slight mid-bass bump. Characteristic of iFi is their ability to tune devices with care. The bass boost is not overwhelming and was only discernible after several tracks during A/B testing. The overall sound is also quite smooth. There is no harshness. The next question we had to answer is whether the Zen Can adopts the Zen DAC's sound signature. I have extensive experience with the Zen DAC. It has a slightly warm sound signature with a slightly elevated bass and slightly rolled off treble. It is smooth across the entire frequency range. How can we tell if the Can adopts the DAC's sound profile? Well, we go back and forth between the sound cause and the DAC. I connected the DAC to the Can via the RCA and left volume at fixed output. Furthermore, I plugged the headphones from the Can to the DAC in the middle of songs to determine whether the DAC's own output sounded different from the Can and the DAC combo. Ugh, I know, this is getting a little confusing, but bear with me. The answer is that yes, the Can does adopt the DAC sound profile, but it is a rather minor way. Bass was the most obvious difference I could hear. With the DAC and Can combo, the Can had longer mid-bass decay and less clear sub-bass and mid-bass separation when compared to the Zen DAC's output alone. Instrument separation was a little less apparent with the two Zen combo. Indeed, instruments sounded a little muffled and congested with this combination. When I compared this to the Zen Cause and Zen Can combo, I could tell that the Can presented better instrument separation and faster bass decay. Vocals with the two Zen combo sounded very similar to the Zen Cause stack. The only slight, and I mean slight, difference was that the vocals seemed to be just a tad bit more forward on the Zen combo. Tests demonstrate that the Zen Can indeed picks up its DAC's character. Whether you use a neutral DAC like the Zen Cause or a slightly warm DAC like the Zen DAC, the Can will demonstrate that sound signature. Of course, be mindful that the Can's slightly warm presentation itself might become a little muddy if you pair it with a warm-sounding DAC. You may or may not enjoy that. The next test we had to perform is with the HD6XX. There were two major questions to resolve. According to the Hype Machine reviewers and Drop, the Drop version of the Zen Can was made specifically for the HD6XX. Two reasons were given. First, the Drop Can is supposed to provide lots of power to properly drive the 6XX. Second, the Drop Can has an EQ switch that makes the 6XX sound the best ever. Coincidentally, the regular iFi Can also has an EQ selector in exactly the same spot as the Drop's version. To test power output, I plugged in the 6XX using the single-ended. I kept the Zen Can connected to the Zen Cause and used the Zen DAC as its own standalone unit. At approximately 3 o'clock on the volume knob, the 6XX became incredibly loud for the Zen DAC. Safe, comfortable volume was around 1 o'clock. Clearly, the Zen DAC has plenty of power to make these headphones loud. I next switched to the Zen Can at 0 additional gain. At this setting, I could not get the Can to match the volume of the Zen DAC, so I boosted gain by 6 decibels. At this setting, I was able to volume match with the Can's knob at approximately 1 o'clock, and this was equivalent to about 3 o'clock on the Zen DAC. Adding more and more gain did not alter the sound signature after the 6 decibel boost. The headphones simply got louder, not better sounding. In other words, once the 6XX got sufficient power for the drivers, it could not care less how much more gain it received from the Zen Can. I repeated this test with the 4.4mm balanced cable from Heart Audio. I did not need to increase the gain at all through the balanced connection. The 6XX became plenty loud at 1 o'clock on the 0 additional gain. However, adding the 6 decibel gain provided the additional power much sooner on the volume dial, as you would expect. I have to lament that I made my hearing suffer for this particular test. I had to make sure that the gain boost was actually not making a difference. Consequently, I cranked up the volume to idiot-level volume on lower gain settings so that they matched the volume output of the higher gain settings, and I went back and forth. The result was the same with the single-ended connection. Gain only makes the headphones louder. The louder you get the headphones, the longer the bass decays, and, well, the louder everything is. It's not rocket science. Getting these headphones, the 6XX, louder and louder with more and more gain doesn't mean that you're getting better and better performance out of the driver. It just means that these drivers are getting louder and louder, as you would expect. There was a noticeable difference between the Zen DAC and Zen Can, however. I pushed the DAC to overwhelming volume. I tried to match the sub-bass rumble and mid-bass impact that I was hearing on the Zen Can with its 6 decibel and plus boost. I simply could not get the exact same sound signature, no matter how loud the 6XX became on the Zen DAC. The difference was more obvious at excessively louder volumes. When the two amps were volume matched to save volume, the differences were much smaller. I next decided to test the EQ functions. I first tried the bass boost, and as one would expect, the Zen Can boosted the sub-bass and mid-bass by a few decibels. The sub-bass had slightly longer delay. Vocals remained the same with the bass boost on as they were with the bass boost off. The Zen DAC does not have X-bass like the Zen Can. Instead, the DAC has true bass. What's the difference? Well, the difference is in the type of boost you get. The X-bass on the Can boosts sub-bass and mid-bass, but keeps some separation between those two frequencies. The true bass on the DAC elevates the sub-bass and melds it with the mid-bass. In other words, the true bass sounds muddier than the X-bass does. And what about that 3D filter? Well, it does something, just marginally. The difference is hardly apparent on bass-heavy tracks. On pop and acoustic songs, however, the 3D filter is more apparent. The very slight change it brings is nothing like what iFi says on their website. Maybe this filter is headphone-specific, in which case the 6XX is not a good candidate for the experience. Nevertheless, with the 3D filter engaged, it was marginally easier to hear separation of multiple vocalists. Bass is slightly decreased or rolled off with the 3D filter. The resulting sound signature is a little bit leaner, cleaner, and clearer. In exchange, vocals and instruments sound more distant. Frankly, if you have dark-sounding headphones and you want to achieve a little bit of separation and clarity, the 3D filter might help in that regard, but just don't expect miracles. The next question is whether the Zen Can drives the Modhouse Argon, a headphone that is notoriously difficult to power. The Argon, when properly amplified, has an intense sub-bass rumble and mid-bass slam. They are also fairly clear, and those are really the selling points of these headphones. The answer is yes, the Zen Can drives the Argon rather well, but you have to push the gain to maximum, and the volume has to be around approximately 3 o'clock for the full effect. If you keep volume at a safer level, around 12 o'clock with the 18 decibel gain boost, you can still hear the rumble, but not quite the same. In contrast, the Zen DAC drove the Argon, technically. I mean, it provided power and the headphones made sound. But even at maximum volume, the Argons did not sound the same as they did on the Zen Can. The rumble was there, of course, but the clarity was not. It was a stark difference between the two amplifiers in this test. Alright, so do either the Zen DAC or Zen Can drive the 600 ohm DT880? Yes, of course, both do. Using the balance connection on the Zen DAC, I was able to get the 880 at extremely loud volume, but only when the Zen DAC was maxed out. I still could not hear the clarity and tight bass response that the 880 can provide when properly amplified by an amplifier that provides high output impedance. I switched to the Zen Can using the balance connection. On 0 gain boost, the Can could not reproduce the sound of the DAC at max. With 6 decibel, 12 decibel, and 18 decibel gain boost, the 880 was easily driven. With the 18 decibel boost, the headphones got far too loud at around 12 o'clock on the volume knob. As far as pure drivability is concerned, both the Zen DAC and Zen Can provide sufficient power for the DT880, but obviously the Zen Can has tremendous power to spare. However, if you actually want to hear the 600 ohm DT880 at their best, you really should listen to them on an amplifier with high output impedance. I think iFi could have easily just made the Zen DAC more powerful and charged a few bucks more, but they decided to take a different path. There's nothing wrong with them having something like the Zen Can in the iFi lineup. The amplifier is very powerful. It drove the most difficult headphones I have. Its sound signature is typical iFi, slightly warm and smooth. The EQ filters work, and once again, they are done with care and precision. You get just enough bass effect to hear the change, and not so much that it bloats the sound. The 3D effect is, fine. As with every 3D effect I've ever heard, it's a gimmick that I find a little insulting. But iFi's tuning is still the best of any manufacturer that does this. For about $170, you get a great little package. As for the claim that the drop version of this thing is perfect for the HD6XX, well, I don't know. I have not heard the drop version, and I will not be buying it. I think Drop's marketing and reviewer collaboration was disgusting, so I won't throw my money at their feet. What I will say is this: compare the specs of the Zen Can with the Drop version. Is the $80 difference and the months-long wait worth the alleged special tuning for the HD6XX? In my opinion, if you have the HD6XX or 650 or 660S or 600 and you already have the Zen DAC, you really don't need to buy the Zen Can. Yes, the X-bass function on the Can is smoother and more refined than the bass boost on the DAC, but unless you really feel that the HD6XX needs more bass, I cannot recommend you buy the Zen Can for specifically that purpose for the Sennheiser headphones. If you want a powerful amplifier to pair with a neutral DAC, then the Zen Can is an excellent option. It is good value for performance. For $170, you get plenty of raw power, good EQ options that work, and balanced connection.